Hi, I'm Curious Vedanth, and welcome to the first episode of season 3 of my podcast. Today, my guest is my father, Jayasimha Nuggehalli, who is the co-founder and chief operating officer of Global Food Partners in Singapore. We had spoken to Elisa Lane, the chief executive officer of Global Food Partners, or GFP, in Season 1, Episode 5. Therefore, in today's episode, we'll talk more about the adventures in Jayasimha's life that has brought him to doing what he does today. Hi Jayasimha, welcome to my show.
Hi Vedanth, thank you so much for having me on your show.
You're welcome. This is going to be exciting. Remember the first time where I interviewed my mother? That was really exciting too. And now I'm excited to interview you.
Yeah, the interview with your mother was the all-time favorite of your podcast.
I know. It was also the first, which was really nice.
Yeah.
So Jayasimha, I'm curious to know what got you thinking about helping animals.
So Vedant, when I was in high school, in television, there was a program that used to come called Heads and Tails. And it was hosted by Mrs. Menka Gandhi. And in that, they would show different kinds of animal suffering and what was wrong and everything. And I saw that, and obviously I thought that what was being done to animals was wrong. And later on, I learned about this organization called People for Animals that she had founded. And Manju uncle, whom you know, who is being your guest on your podcast, and the founder of Happy Hens Farm, and we went to People for Animals in Bangalore and started to volunteer there. And that's how we became interested in animals.
Wow, that's really interesting. Well, I would also really like to join PFA, but I'm too young.
No, it's never too young, Vedant. So already what you're doing with your podcast, interviewing people who are making difference for animals, environment, is again very important. And I'm sure People for Animals would love to have you as a member.
Yeah, so I would love to apply.
Yeah, sure. Maybe right after this podcast, we can get you a membership to People for Animals.
Yeah, that would be fun. So, Jayasimha, I'm also curious to know, were you a vegan for all your life?
No, Vedant, I wasn't vegan for all my life. It was only when I finished my 12th standard or second PUC and joined law, I learned about veganism as a way of life. And I decided to choose a vegan way of life when I joined law in the year 2000. That's almost 21 years ago, Vedant.
Wow, that's
That's long ago.
Yeah, I know. And which university did you go to study law?
I went to Bangalore University. I went to a college called as Bangalore Institute of Legal Studies.
That's interesting. So, what work did you do in PFA?
So, People for Animals Bangalore was running then the country's only urban wildlife rescue center. And they would do a lot of rescue of animals who were either injured or being sold illegally in markets. Then in India, it was very common to see people who would make bears dance. They were called kalandars. So rescuing bears, dancing bears from kalandars. Snake charming used to be very common. So rescuing snakes from snake charmers. So it was a lot of wildlife or urban wildlife rescue and rehabilitation. So I used to volunteer there mostly with relation to doing these rescue.
What is urban wildlife?
So when we talk about wildlife, a lot of time we end up thinking about the jungle, right? Saying that, oh, lion, tiger, elephants, and leopards and things like that. But there are a lot of wildlife that actually live inside a city. And that's what we call as urban wildlife. And Bangalore happens to be one of those cities which is gifted to be around a lot of forests, national parks. So you see a lot of wildlife who are within the forest. So it could be snakes, parakeets, miners, munias, mongoose, and a lot of the other wild animals who are found inside the city. And rescuing them is called as, they are basically called urban wildlife.
I guess Singapore, like here in Singapore, it's just like Bangalore because where we live around, there's so many nature parks.
That's right. Singapore has a lot of urban wildlife as well. So including the otters that you find in Singapore, they all are urban wildlife.
So urban wildlife, the moment it leaves the forest, is it part of the urban wildlife?
Not just when it leaves the forest, it's basically wildlife that just lives in urban areas, right? Who lives in city. They're called as urban wildlife. And they live in urban areas because cities have a lot of food, right? For example, if you're looking at a kite, which is a scavenging bird, in places like India, where you don't have a lot of garbage disposable system that are very good. So what ends up happening is that they end up finding meat from a local meat shop. So you find a lot of kites, or they can find dead animals who met with a road accident or something like that. Or for example, there are like a lot of rats and mice, rodents who you find inside cities. So snakes come to eat them. So they all are urban wildlife. So they don't just leave the forest and come to the city. These are animals who are wild animals who basically live in the city.
Wow, that's interesting. Very interesting, in fact. So after you worked in PFA, what happened next?
So after I worked in PFA, or rather while I was working in PFA, I started being a consultant to a newspaper called The Hindu. They had a program called as Newspaper in Education. So basically what they did in Newspaper in Education was that Hindu would supply newspaper to students in school, and I would go as a consultant to different schools and get children to read the newspaper, understand the issues in the newspaper, sometimes write letters to the editors and things like that. So I started working as a consultant for Newspaper in Education. And after I graduated from law college, I decided to join full-time as a coordinator for campaigns and legal affairs for an organization called as PETA, which is People for the Ethical Treatment of Animals in India.
Nice. What do they do in PETA? Like, what does PETA do?
So PETA does a lot of things, but what my role at PETA was to... India is one of the largest leather exporters, and there's a lot of suffering that happens in the leather supply chain. So I was involved in a pilot project to improve transport, slaughter and also conditions of animals in markets when they are transported and slaughtered for leather. So that was something that I was doing. I was also involved in improving the life of animals who are kept in zoos across the country. So PETA basically works under a very simple principle that animals are not ours to eat, wear, or to be experimented on. So while at PETA, I was involved in multiple work to improve the life of animals. I was also involved in a program to end cosmetic testing of animals. So, all cosmetic products are tested on animals. So bullfighting, cockfighting, a lot of these issues where animals are abused, and I was involved in all of those work at PETA.
So you said you were involved in a project to end cosmetic treatment on animals. So now, all the cosmetic products, what are they tested on?
So a lot of cosmetic products are now tested on non-animal methods. So it's basically called as in vitro testing. And also what happens is that now you have the computer technology that has developed so much. So basically the reason why cosmetic products were tested was to see if, just in case it's a lipstick, right? If people were to digest the lipstick by chance because you're putting on your lip, what kind of effect can happen? Is there any toxic effect that can happen, right? And now we have so much data already from different animal testing and different processes that the safety testing is still done, but instead of using animals, they use these really, really modern methods using computers and other things to test these products so that they are safe for human use.
So they basically use these robot kind of things which are like humans?
Not like robot kind of things that are humans, but then, for example, there are these people who are working on what is called as a human body on a chip. So basically what they're doing is, instead of testing something on an animal and then seeing whether it works on a human being or not, they're now replicating a human body on a chip. So there are what's called as organ on a chip. So if you want to see what's the effect of a chemical or a drug on somebody's kidney, instead of testing it on an animal like a rat or a mice, and then figuring out, okay, what happened to the rat, and then guessing what happens on the human being, now they use these chips. So they're not necessarily robots, but these are tissues that are taken from human beings and then put on a chip. And so it's called the human body on a chip. And that's how a lot of the testings are being done nowadays.
Isn't like the effects on an animal body different from the human body?
Exactly, Vedant.
How do they, if something, so example, if a lipstick, when you're putting it on an animal's lip, if the animal swallows it and it's still fine, how are you 100% sure that it will work on humans?
Exactly, Vedant. And that's one of the reasons why animal testing is faulty. And people need to move away from animal testing to new testing methodologies, right?
Yeah.
Because animals are not human beings. A lot of things that and also what was found was a lot of products, including not just cosmetics, but even drugs and medicines and things like that, that were found to be okay on animals. When people started to consume them, it wasn't working well at all. So now the scientific community overall around the globe has come to a conclusion that the best way or the most efficient way of testing either the efficiency of a drug or to find what the toxic impact of a chemical or any material is to use these modern methods rather than the primitive way of testing it on an animal. And then you're only doing a guess, right? As in you're doing a guess as to whether it will have the same effect. And we know that most of the time it doesn't work at all.
Yeah, even I agree, it won't work at all.
Yeah.
So, after working at PETA, what did you do?
So, while I was working at PETA, I met with this wonderful human being called Chetana Mirle, who was heading the Humane Society International's farm animal department. And I met with her in India. And they were looking for someone to run the Humane Society International's farm animal welfare work in India. So I decided to join Humane Society International. So after working at PETA, I moved to join the Humane Society International as a farm animal campaign manager.
You keep telling me that you are the leader of the Humane Society International India. How did you become the leader from just the leader of one department?
Perfect. So what happened was that when Humane Society International India started, the then CEO, Dr. Andrew Rowan, was looking for someone to lead. At that point of time, Humane Society International only did had only two departments working in India. One was for street dogs and other was farm animals, and I was running the farm animals one. And because Vedant, as you know, I also have a law background, and I was able to help set up the Humane Society International India, like incorporate, get all the legal permissions, income tax permissions and stuff like that. I volunteered to say that could I just run Humane Society International India, and I was given an opportunity by very kind people, two very kind people, Dr. Andrew Rowan and Kitty Block, who were my supervisors who trusted me to establish and run Humane Society International India.
Nice. So now, after all of this, how did you come to GFP?
So, with Humane Society International India, I was there for 10 years. and saw that Humane Society International India, from being a small handful of people, grew into a big organization, right? And working for all animals, from rescuing animals from in dog meat trade in Nagaland, to running big court battles against very important issues, and also were taking on one of the world's largest animal sacrifice in Nepal. At that point in time, I was also asked to see if I can help expand Humane Society International's footprint in other regions. So I started to help HSI expand in the Philippines, in Vietnam, Bhutan, Sri Lanka, Nepal, Bangladesh, and other places as well. And while this was happening, I had one thing, Vedant, that I've always wanted to do is spend my life to do most good, doing the best amount of good. And there was a need to focus on egg-laying hens in Asia, because egg-laying hens were suffering, and not a lot of was being done. And I saw an opportunity to help these animals. I decided that it was time for me to take on another challenge, and that's why I decided to co-found Global Food Partners, focusing on Asia, in countries where there was a maximum need to get these birds out of cages.
So basically, you're expanding the awareness.
Expanding the awareness. Broadly, Vedant, every human being has about 80,000 hours in their life in which they can work. After that's the number of hours that you get. The question is that how do you use those 80,000 hours? You can use those 88,000 hours with a single goal of making most money, or you can use those 80,000 hours with a single goal of doing most good and reducing suffering.
Like you.
I don't think I'm doing that, but I think what is important is one to strive for that, as in to strive to see, are we able to make the most good so that we are able to reduce suffering. But there are a lot of people on earth who are doing way more better things than I am doing to reduce suffering, not just for animals, but human beings as well. And broadly, Vedant, pain and suffering itself is a bad thing. And we as human beings have this unique ability to reduce pain and suffering, not only to ourselves, not only to our own species, but to other species as well.
Like animals.
Like animals. Now, once we have that ability, it's our responsibility to use it and help it. Right? For example, let's say if we are passing by and we see a child who is drowning, isn't it our moral responsibility to go and help the child?
Yes.
Right. But what happens is that many a times there are a lot of people who we don't necessarily see drowning, or it isn't not drowning, it's in suffering, right? And just because we don't see the suffering, it doesn't mean that suffering doesn't. There. Correct. So it is our moral responsibility to do most good, and that's what my life has been all about. And my life has been all about because just the number of people who have supported me, including Amma, you, my parents, my in-laws who happen to be your grandparents, great-grandparents, with this really supportive friend circle who have kind of said, yes, that's a good thing, and they are there to support, and that's what has been really helpful.
Yeah, I mean, 80,000 hours is it sounds like it's a lot, but it's actually very little.
Correct.
How do you get to do so much work in just 80,000 hours?
So 80,000 hours, you're right. 80,000 hours seems a lot, but is very, very little. So the way you do it is by focusing on your skill, right? You can't solve all problems. So you solve the most pressing problem, right? So how do you figure out what is the most pressing problem, right? For example, let's say, Vedant, if there is a flooding in the house versus a toy that is broken, which one do you fix first?
You would fix the flood.
The flood, right? Because that's the most pressing problem. So you find out what's the most pressing problems by using three things. You find out how big is the problem.
Because flooding,
It's a big problem.
it can basically almost break all your valuables. But a broken toy, it's not like it's the end of the world.
Correct. Right? So it's how big is the problem. For example, animal suffering is a big problem. Billions of animals, land animals are raised every year, and there's a lot of them suffer. The second thing that you see is it neglected? Right? That means, are people already doing something to solve that problem?
Some people are, but some people aren't.
So you need to see, is there enough number of people who are solving that problem? If there is a problem where a lot of people already are trying to solve, then you might want to look at the next big problem and see if a less number of people are trying to solve and help that, right? If it's neglected already. Now, let's say if this flood is there and a lot of people are already trying to get the flood water out. But what might end up happening is that the next door you see that there is a broken door. You might want to help that because not everybody is trying to help that. Rather more neglected. It's a more neglected problem. So you need to figure out as to which is the biggest problem. Of that biggest problem, which is the most neglected problem. And I saw that animal suffering was a big problem.
Yeah.
A handful of people work on it. So it's a very, very neglected problem. And not only just animal suffering. Suffering of animals who are raised for food is a big problem. A lot of people who talk about animals only talk about dogs and cats and like preventing suffering of dogs and cats and other companion animals, or maybe wild animals, right?
But you think of other animals, not only dogs. You think about dogs and cats, but you also think about cows, crows, chickens, and all of those animals.
To see which of these animals are suffering the most, and then which of those animals which are suffering the most, which of them are fully neglected. And then where can I bring myself to reduce that suffering? So that 80,000 hours, which seems a lot, but is actually
very little.
Correct. You use that time to solve those world's most pressing problem. And the world's most pressing problem that I have dedicated to solve is
the animal suffering
in factory farms. Animal suffering in factory farms.
Could you tell us more about factory farming?
Sure. So factory farming of animals basically means where animals, instead of treating them as sentient beings, you treat them as a machine. So a lot of time what happens is that birds, for example, egg-laying hens, are confined in these tiny, tiny cages for their entire life where they can't stand up straight, turn their wings, stretch, do anything that is natural for them. So basically what happens is that when you use a farming method where an animal, instead of being treated as a sentient being, you treat them as a machine and you only optimize for high productivity, but instead of welfare of the animal, is called as factory farming.
So factory farming is also like, so you're a hamster and you're stuck in this one hamster wheel for almost your whole life, and you need to keep running, and if you stop running, you will get hit. So when you run, electricity comes. Is that like how factory farming works?
If people were to do that for hamsters, that would be factory farming of hamsters. Exactly right.
But people don't do that.
People don't do that for hamsters, but Vedant, a lot of times just for our electricity, people who work in coal mines, people who work in different energy units, they are made to work with no proper break, with no safety and things like that. Yeah. So there is a lot of suffering, and many times what happens is that when people choose renewable energy like solar and things like that, we can actually get people out of these coal mines and things like that into an alternate job where the suffering can reduce. Suffering and exploitation can happen in factory farms for animals. It can happen on real factory for human beings as well. And I think one of the key things again where people can reduce suffering is to see that the brands that they buy are treating animals or animals properly, humans properly, and all of that. I think that's very, very important.
Like example, maybe someone who's controlling a train. lesser than they don't have a seat. And the train journey is like for a whole night. They have to keep standing. Even that's suffering.
Right. Working conditions for humans can be really, really bad. And it's important that businesses do the best that they can to provide the best possible working conditions for people. And it could be either somebody who works in a train, or it could be a lot of times people who work in garment industry, where people stitch clothes and stuff like that, where they stitch for a long period of time. A lot of people, there are news reports where they say they don't even get a chance to go to the washroom. Grown-up people have to wear diapers because those factories make them work like that. And suffering and exploitation not only happens for animals, they also happen for you humans. And it is important that if somebody wants to dedicate the 80,000 hours that they have to reduce that suffering, that's a good thing as well. Good thing as well.
I'm planning to do that.
Very good, Vedant. You can figure out what your cause area is, what makes you really passionate about. So you can identify your own cause area and work on that cause area.
Yeah, I know. I could do that.
Yeah.
So, Jayasimha, what are your hobbies?
I love to cook, and I love to read, and I also like to run, I like to run in rain. I also love to go on long walks and hikes. Those are my hobbies.
So, how can my listeners help animals?
They can do very simple things. There's like a simple 3R principle. One is, wherever possible, reduce the consumption of animal sourced products,
which I'm doing in school.
Very good.
I'm telling people to eat less meat.
Very good. The second thing that they can do is that if they have to use an animal source product, to buy from higher welfare farms. So if people have to consume eggs, then better consume a cage-free or a free-range egg rather than a conventional eggs. And the third thing that people can do is work to find replacement of the product. So instead of using a normal cheese, try and use a vegan cheese or use a meat analog and things like that. So those are the three absolute easy way that people can actually help animals.
What did you want to be as a child?
I wanted to be many things as a child, Vedant, but one thing that I really wanted to be as a child is a chef. I wanted to be a chef, but sadly, I couldn't find a vegan cooking school or a vegetarian cooking school. And all the chef training required to cook meat. And I wasn't too excited about that. So I gave up on that dream. But then I lived up to the dream by cooking yummy food at home and for guests who come home. But for the longest period of time as a child, I wanted to be a chef.
What advice do you have for young students now?
My advice to young students now is to explore as much as possible. Use your time to do different things. Volunteer with different organizations. Keep an open mind. A lot of times say, oh no, when you're a young child, you need to figure out what to do. No, you don't need to figure out what to do. Go, volunteer, read, figure out what makes you interested, and then follow that particular thing. So that would be my advice.
That is some really good advice. Thank you so much for coming on my show.
Thank you so much, Vedant, and congratulations on your 49th episode.
Thank you.
And it's amazing that you've been doing this for 49 weeks every week without missing one.
Thank you.
That's really commendable. Good job.
Thanks. Dear listeners, follow my Facebook page, Curious Vedanth, to get updates on my upcoming episodes, to listen at leisure on your phone and get notified about future episodes. Subscribe by searching for Curious Vedanth wherever you get your podcasts, such as Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Stitcher, Google Podcasts, and many more. You can also listen to my show on curiousvedanth.com. Thank you for listening to Curious Vedanth. And don't forget to rate and leave comments.